Hey, hi folks. I just wanted to do a little pre-recorded video here to set up the last part of the class. Watch this after you've completed exam 2 and before you've started the readings for the last 2 chapters out of Ethics Goes to the Movies by Falzone. I'm going to cover some of the big main themes that are going to be talked about in this next section of the class. In the last part of the class, we really kind of study the weird stuff. I just wanted to do a little bit of a pre-recorded lecture here on that. So with that in mind, I'll go ahead and share my screen here to walk through the presentation that I have to set up this, again, set up this next part of the course. So let's just get this going here from the very beginning. And so this last part of the class, in these last 2 chapters, we're going to cover what you could call alternative approaches. Well, alternatives to what? Alternatives to the kinds of mainstream academic moral philosophies that we've looked at primarily up until this point. And so what I mean by the mainstream approaches are really kind of like a virtue ethics in the style of Plato and Aristotle, utilitarianism, and deontology or Kantian ethics. In many ways, contract theory out of Hobbes is a little bit different than what I'm going to count as mainstream moral philosophy, because in Hobbes it's rooted in self-interested rationality. And so in some ways we've already covered some alternatives to mainstream approaches in Hobbes and in ethical egoism, which we did talk about a little bit in the last portions of the class. And if you'll remember, what set those theories apart from the other ones that we looked at is all of the other theories that we've looked at so far were rooted in kind of this idea of an abstract moral reasoner, a universal moral reasoner, even in Plato and in Aristotle there, as opposed to a self-interested moral reasoner in Hobbes's contractarianism and ethical egoism. So again, when I'm talking about the mainstream or orthodox moral theory, what I have in mind are basically an Aristotelian or Platonic virtue ethics, even in the Aquinas natural law sort there would kind of go under that, or along with that, a utilitarianism or deontology or Kantian moral theory. Those are kind of the big camps in mainstream academic moral philosophy. And in this last part of the course, we're going to look at some alternatives to those approaches. And so I want to talk about in this little lecture, what do I mean by alternative approaches? And so part of this will be a little bit of a recap and summary of some key things that we've looked at up to this point, and then a foreshadowing of things to think about as we move through these last couple of chapters. So your textbook, Falzone's Ethics Goes to the Movies, he talks about traditional moral theory, which he even puts in quote marks there. And so what I mean by mainstream or orthodox moral theories, or what he basically means, the textbook author basically means by traditional approaches. Again, the traditional there, even in quote marks. So here we go. So if you remember when I started off with my What is Moral Theory lecture at the very beginning of the semester, I basically, what I was introducing you there and setting up was mainstream or traditional moral theory. And so generally then in those theories, the basic idea of ethics, of course, is about right conduct and good living. It's about what's proper conduct and what's good character, right? And depending on whether you have an act-based or a character-based theory, you go one way or another there. And so everybody, except for perhaps psychopaths, already has some kind of moral beliefs or opinions or attitudes. But moral theory, as we talked about, is not just concerned with our unreflective or uncritical moral judgments. It's about developing a systematic and rational and coherent account of morality. And so the central purpose of moral philosophy then, and Postman here gives us a good definition of traditional or orthodox moral philosophy, is to secure valid principles of conduct and value that can be instrumental in guiding human actions and producing good character. So all along the way, we've emphasized this idea that rational argument plays a key role in philosophy, and in particular in moral philosophy. What moral theorists are up to is trying to defend a standard of right conduct and a view of the nature of morality through rational argumentation, right? And then in applying moral theories, logical reasoning plays a role there. Critical reasoning and logical reasoning has a role to play there as well. And so if you think about, again, those traditional or mainstream moral philosophies that we've looked at, again, they all have some common traits. Most of them, again, with the exception of Hobbes, which I'm kind of counting as the outlier there with his version of contractarianism, they're all, even though they have different versions of this, they're all objectivist, realist, and universalist views of ethics. In other words, meta-ethically speaking, they presuppose, some kind of objectivity and universality with regard to moral truth there, or with regard to human nature that can then be the basis of a single universal standard, which is what normative ethical theory is about. And so that's pretty much been the focus of our class, of course, is looking at different theories that identify and defend a single standard of right conduct or good living that's binding on everyone and can be applied to all moral questions. And so when you think about the golden mean in Aristotle, the categorical imperative in Kant, or the cardinal virtues, or the utility principle, the greatest happiness principle, that's really what all those theories were up to. That they share these traits. They were all prescriptive, right? They give us a decision-making procedure in most cases. Virtue ethics is a little bit of an outlier there. They all presuppose or assert explicitly some kind of universality and objectivity. They're all public principles, right? They're open to others evaluating them, right? And then they're supposed to be practical. They need to be applicable to at least a wide range of everyday moral problems that could be used by people, right, in our everyday lives. That's the idea of these moral theories, is that they're trying to give a single account of that. They just disagree about what justifies that account in most cases. But and even though there are some differences in moral conclusions, they all share large amounts of the content of morality. They're all worried about promise keeping and what justifies promise keeping or truth telling, and so forth. And so here are some examples of those, again, traditional moral theories that we've been looking at. The golden rule, the categorical imperative, the greatest happiness principle, and the golden mean are all theories or normative standards of that mainstream orthodox type. And again, all those theories that we've looked at so far share these sorts of traits as well. The idea is that they're all based on some kind of universal account of human nature or impartial moral reasoning. I say impartial there, and again, that's kind of what separates Hobbes, because Hobbes is rooted in our own individual self-interest and desires there. Ethics and normative theory, again, if you think back to Posman's definition, is about identifying, defending, and applying that abstract principle of justice or obligation via rational argumentation. These theories, for the most part, all downplayed our individual psychological traits, and were worried about what was common or universal to humanity in terms of human nature, right? And then they tended, especially in the cases of utilitarianism and deontology, to treat social relations in a likewise very abstract way. In utilitarianism, we're all kind of just relating to each other as possible benefactors or victims of our actions. And with regard to Kant, we're all kind of related to each other just as rational beings, qua rational beings, behind a veil of ignorance, like we talked about with Rawls. So the moral reasoner in these theories is quite often characterized in a rather abstract way, and our social relationships are also kind of construed in rather abstract ways. Again, one of the reasons for that, this point's well taken, is that they're supposed to be universal and impartial. And so that means you have to ignore a lot of our own individual desires if we're going to have a universalist and objective moral theory. If we started off with things that were particular and contingent just to us, we would end up with some version of relativism. And as we've seen at the very beginning of this semester, relativism and subjectivism look like they're very problematic theories on both logical grounds in terms of the arguments that we looked at, and kind of morally suspect, right? So again, these are some common traits of mainstream moral philosophies or moral theories. And then so in this next section, we're going to look at a few alternative approaches. And so here's some examples of those alternative approaches that are covered in these last two chapters. So we're going to look at starting off with Nietzsche's radical individualism, or his radical version of perfectionism. I've talked about perfectionism before, but we're going to end up with a distinctively different type of perfectionism with Nietzsche. Kierkegaard's version of divine command theory is radically different than the orthodox or classical divine command theory that we looked at earlier in the semester. Kierkegaard's here, as I described, as a fideistic or fideistic version of divine command theory, because he's going to give up on rationality as being the basis of morality. Existentialist thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, they're going to give up on human nature or God as a basis for morality. Care ethics is going to be very different, especially compared to deontology and utilitarianism, our two main modern moral theories. And then the ethics of the other, or other ways of talking about this, the ethics of alterity or transcendence. Our example here is going to be Levinas. It's quite different than, even though it has a mainstream moral idea central to it, obligation. Levinas is going to ground obligation in a radically different way, especially when compared to somebody like Kant or utilitarianism. And then we're going to wrap up the semester with Foucault's ethics of resistance. Foucault is primarily a neo-Nietzschean philosopher, and so he was influenced by Nietzsche in various ways, and really emphasized, he offered, like Nietzsche, he developed a genealogical critique of modern morality, and then offers an ethics of resistance. Almost everybody on this list, especially Nietzsche, and especially the existentialists, and especially Foucault, are often considered radical thinkers, radical philosophers in various ways. Not always radical in a positive sense, but in a pejorative sense. So what makes these approaches alternatives is that in one way or another, they're going to give up on one of those key aspects of mainstream moral theory. They might downplay the role of reason as a basis for morality, or of universal human nature as a basis for morality. They may critique or straight up reject key aspects of what we might think of as the content of traditional morality or common sense morality. Again, an area which, although there are differences, there was a lot of convergence between the more mainstream moral theories. I used to talk about how lots of these moral philosophers aren't disagreeing so much over the content of morality, what are the moral norms that we ought to abide by, but what justifies those moral norms. And so again, each of the thinkers that we're going to look at in these next thinkers, in various ways and in more and less radical ways, give up or reject some of those aspects, one or more of those aspects of mainstream moral philosophy. And so what do I mean by that? Well, and of course, not every theory that we're going to look at in this next section checks every one of these little boxes on this list, but just in some way or another, they do this, and in varying degrees. So some of them may reject or, reject or seem to reject objectivity with regard to prescriptive claims. That's going to be the case with regard to Nietzsche. It's going to be difficult to see how Sartre could have existentialism as a humanism if he's given up on reason in the way that some commentators take him to be. These different thinkers may reject a basic task, seem to reject the basic task of orthodox normative theory, or offer criticisms of traditional philosophical concepts that would make it very difficult to level a coherent account of morality. Um, some of them will either challenge, downplay, or outright reject. Again, maybe a room for debate on whether it's a full-on rejection or not. The primacy of universal reason and impartial reason as a basis for morality. They may reject much or seemingly all of the content of traditional moral thinking or moral values. And then another key theme that we'll look at in this next section is whether these different alternative approaches, whether they emphasize the self as the primary aspect of morality, if they emphasize maybe something like self-creation or the notion of individual authenticity, versus whether or not they emphasize the primacy of very generally here the other. And of course some of these different theories construe the other in different ways, so that'll be a broad theme that we have to think about in particular ways as we get into each of these theories. And so, you know, one way to think about how to divide up these alternative theories is whether they are whether they emphasize the self primarily in self-creation or individual authenticity, or whether they emphasize some kind of radical altruism or the other as being the primary focus of morality. And so with those themes and topics in mind, we're going to start off on this last part of the course. And again, here's where we're really going to look at, what might be considered the outliers in moral philosophy and in philosophy, Western philosophy in general. So interesting, but also some stuff to worry about with regard to these thinkers. Again, I hope everybody's doing okay. Please check out this video again before we do any live chats over this stuff, so you can maybe formulate some questions about the content that we've covered so far. So with that in mind, y'all take care and have a good one.